Live happily with your lover. It's been a week since my beloved wife left this note and vanished. I stand motionless in the room, holding our engagement ring. How did it come to this? My name is James, a 43-year-old office worker. My wife, Sarah, also 43, is a housewife. Though we were never blessed with children, our life together was pure happiness. We traveled a lot together, and on days off from work, we'd go shopping or dine out. Of course, during our long marriage, we had our arguments. But we always made it a point to apologize if we felt we were wrong and reconciled by the end of the day. We frequently visited each other's parents' homes and had a great relationship with our in-laws. There seemed to be no issues. I always believed that our calm, happy days with my wife would last forever. However, the end of my blissful marital life with my loving wife came suddenly. When I returned home from work, the lights were off. Usually, since Sarah was home, the lights would be on. But that wasn't all. The front door, which would normally be locked, was unlocked, and there was no smell of a delicious dinner at all. Thinking she might be out, I called her cell phone, but she didn't answer, and she didn't even read my messages. An hour passed, then two, but Sarah did not return. Something felt very off. That's when I noticed it, sitting down on the couch. There was a piece of paper on the table. In Sarah's handwriting, it read, "Live happily with your lover." Of course, I had never cheated. She must have misunderstood something. I needed to meet her and talk. Sarah isn't the type to socialize much. It is probably the family home that she would rely on in these situations. I immediately called her mother, Karen. "Karen, it's James. By any chance, is Sarah with you?" "Oh, James, you are back. Sarah isn't here, but I know where she is. However, she told me not to tell you." I was at a loss as to why she would say that. "What do you mean? She seems to suspect me of cheating, but I haven't done anything of the sort. I think she's misunderstood. I need to meet her and talk." I knew from Karen that she knew where Sarah was, so I begged Karen multiple times to let me see her. But Karen didn't tell me. "James, she didn't tell me in detail, but she said she'd thought about this for days. I understand you want to talk, but please, give her some space right now." There was nothing I could say to that. But of course, I couldn't just accept it. Even now, I wonder if my wife thinks I'm meeting with another woman. If only I could see her and clear up the misunderstanding. Nothing progressed and a week has passed. My wife hasn't returned. I took out the engagement ring from the bedroom closet. I was planning to give this ring to my wife today, on our 20th wedding anniversary. Truth is, I didn't have money when we got married. I couldn't afford an engagement ring, and we couldn't even have a wedding. I'm not into flashy things, so I don't need a ring or a wedding. Let's use that money for our daily expenses. That was a thoughtful proposal from my gentle wife, sensing our financial situation. Now that we're comfortable, I can gift it to her. But having a wedding at this age feels embarrassing. Yet, I wanted to properly convey my gratitude for these 20 years to my wife. This engagement ring was for that. During these 20 years, whether we were broke or distressed about not having children, she always stood by me and supported me. Will this ring, which I had prepared hoping for our continued happiness, ever fit on her finger? I held the engagement ring in my hand, feeling lost in our home. One day, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood a beautiful elderly woman. I didn't recognize her. As I was puzzled, the elegant old lady said, "I've been looking for you." I was more confused. Then she continued, "Nice to meet you. My name is Amy. I came here about your uncle. He mentioned wanting to leave you some assets. My deceased father only had a sister, My mother had no siblings. In other words, I don't have an uncle. I thought that she must have mistaken me for someone else, and I told Amy that I do not have an uncle. I figured she would leave after that, but Amy slowly shook her head. No, I am sure it's you. Your mother will understand what I mean. Is your mother's name Catherine? Can I please see her? Indeed, my mother's name was Catherine. However, I was hesitant to introduce her to a stranger. I thought I'd call my mother, and if she also said she didn't know Amy, then Amy would surely give up. So, I called my mother. After explaining the situation, my mother was silent for a while. Bring her to the house. I was taken aback by my mother's words. What? Do you know Amy? Besides, you don't have any siblings, right? Just bring her, we'll talk later. Could my mother possibly know something about Amy's story? Still confused, I brought Amy to our family home. My mother was waiting outside. As soon as she saw Amy, she exclaimed, "Amy." To my surprise, Amy also said, "It's been so long," with tears in her eyes. The two embraced tightly. After their embrace, my mother invited Amy inside. When I demanded an explanation, it wasn't Amy who started speaking, but my mother. My father was the CEO of a real estate company. Amy here used to be our housemaid. We've been close since I was young. My brother was supposed to take over the company, but one day, my father arranged a marriage for me. However, I had a boyfriend at that time, your late father. I found out that I was pregnant with his child around the same time the proposal came. That child was you. My father told me to abort the child and marry the man he had chosen, but I couldn't bear to abort my child or leave him. So I left home, almost eloping. I didn't tell anyone, not even my brother or Amy, where I was going, thinking I'd never see them again. I had no idea my mother was the daughter of a CEO. I had never heard about her eloping before. When Catherine left home, I was devastated, but I believed she would be happier with the man she loved, so I kept my silence. I'm glad she had a happy marriage with him. Amy looked very relieved. She must have been worried about my mother all this time. I'm glad to see you, but why visit after all these years? Well, I have some sad news to share with you, Catherine. Saying that, Amy told my mother that her brother had passed away. Yes, my brother. He probably had a tough time managing everything after I left. He was the one who took care of our parents in their final years. I'm really grateful to him. As my mother shed tears, Amy gently handed her a handkerchief. It must have been a shock to be told out of the blue that her brother had passed away. I comforted my crying mother. My uncle, my mother's brother, regretted not being able to help when my mother left home. He didn't have any children, so he wanted to leave some assets for his sister and nephew. So he asked Amy and her daughter, who was also his secretary named Alice, to locate us. My mother and I were truly touched by my uncle's kindness. But it's been many years since my mother left home. It'd only be right for my uncle's assets to be divided among the company and other relatives. Both my mother and I declined the inheritance. My mother is now enjoying her retirement years. She doesn't need excessive money. As for me, I want to make my precious wife happy with what I earn. Conveying our feelings, Amy respected our decision. Catherine, you're still as kind-hearted as ever, and James, you're such a gentle soul. Your wife must be very lucky. At Amy's words, my expression stiffened. That wasn't the case. My wife had left me. Suddenly feeling downcast, I shared with Amy that my wife had left a week ago. But I truly never cheated on her. I don't even know why she suspected me of infidelity. As I murmured, Amy gasped, "Could it be?" and began dialing a number. After speaking to her daughter, Alice, Amy handed the phone over to me. "Hello, this is Alice, Amy's daughter. I've heard the story. The misunderstanding your wife has might be because of me. About a week ago, I called your house. I had finally found out where you were, and I was quite anxious. I probably didn't explain things well to your wife. I told her I needed to talk to James since he's someone important to me. When she asked why, I thought it would be best to speak with you first, so I told her I couldn't explain at the moment. Looking back, she sounded quite upset throughout the call, and she might have mistaken me as someone you were having an affair with. Hearing that, everything clicked for me. I immediately called my mother-in-law, Karen. After Amy explained the situation over the phone, the misunderstanding that my wife might have mistaken Alice as the other woman was cleared up. I'll try to get in touch with Sarah right away. True to her word, Karen quickly explained the misunderstanding to Sarah, and she brought her to her parents' home that evening. I'm sorry I jumped to conclusions. So, you weren't cheating on me? I was worried. Why would you suspect me of cheating just because of one phone call? If you had doubts, you could have just asked me. It wasn't just the call from Alice. I found an engagement ring hidden in the closet. It's not mine, so I thought you might give it to the other woman. I wanted to ask you about it, but you've been so distant lately. I remembered acting distant. When we first got married, I couldn't afford to buy a ring. So, for our 20th anniversary, I had saved up and planned to give her one, but I was quite embarrassed about the whole thing. It was my first time planning such a surprise, and I thought that if I talked to her about it, she might find out. So, I ended up being distant with her, trying to keep it a secret. But I had no idea it hurted her feelings so much. Also, you love kids. I thought since I can't get pregnant, you might have found someone else. But I thought if that's the case, it can't be helped. So, I left a note and left the house. I had prepared the ring as a token of my gratitude for all the years together, but little did I know it would lead her to suspect me of cheating. I told her about my regret of not being able to afford a ring or a proper wedding when we first got married, and that I had prepared this ring for our 20th anniversary. I don't care at all about not having kids. I'm very happy with just the two of us. During the times we struggled financially, your support was invaluable. I'm really grateful for everything. Let's continue to live happily together. With that, I presented her with the small box containing the ring. I'm so glad I married you. From now on, I won't keep things to myself and will always discuss with you. Those words meant the world to me. I told my wife about my uncle's intention to leave us some inheritance, but she felt, just like I did, that it would be best to decline. However, we were touched by my uncle's kindness. Both of us, and my mother, were delighted that our ties with the relatives were rekindled. My mother had been regretting not being able to visit her parents' graves after falling out with them. Later on, my wife and I, along with my mother, visited the graves of my grandparents and my uncle. I'm set to meet with Amy and Alice after our visit to the gravesite. I had asked them to share stories about my mom's parents and her brother. It seems my mom's parents were a loving couple until the day they passed. I hope that Sarah and I can live just as happily together. The woman I met at a group blind date was a female doctor who was expected by everyone around her. However, inexperienced and lacking in confidence, she is unable to move her body on the spur of the moment. Being a doctor myself, I decided to step in and assist, so she wouldn't disappoint her friends. My name's Jack, a 32-year-old ER doctor. Even at this age, I've never been the topic of gossip. Sure, I've had relationships, but prioritizing work over everything led to many breakups, with most of my exes complaining I didn't give them enough attention. I realized in my late 20s that maybe I'm more cut out for work than romance. In the beginning, there was some emptiness amidst the rush of marriages and births around me, but now I am able to completely separate myself and struggle daily with work and study in order to save as many patients as possible. My family back home is pretty laid back, so no one really pressures me about marriage. Feeling thankful for the blessed environment I was in, all I could think about was becoming self-sufficient as soon as possible. An old high school buddy of mine invited me to a mixer. To be honest, I wasn't interested and was going to decline, but they were one person short and pleaded for my help, so I reluctantly agreed. It was just a filler spot for their group date, so I planned to make a short appearance and then leave. I left my house without dressing up and headed to the meetup spot. Hey everyone, long time no see. It seemed I was the last to arrive, and seeing old friends after so long put a smile on my face. Becoming an adult meant not seeing these friends as often, so reuniting with them at this group date was a pleasant surprise. Even though I wasn't keen on going initially, that moment of reunion made me glad I came. We caught up with each other with old stories and updates on the way to the restaurant, and it felt like we were back in our college days. I was having such a good time, I almost forgot the main purpose was the group date. We were seated and waited a few minutes for the women to arrive. The men suddenly tensed up as the women entered with a cheerful "nice to meet you." Recalling the silent prayers my friends whispered, hoping for a meaningful encounter as we entered the restaurant, I couldn't help but silently cheer them on. After ordering drinks and making a toast, we started introducing ourselves. I'm Jack. I work in corporate. I had made a prior arrangement with my friends to introduce myself with a different profession. It's not that I'm embarrassed, but explaining I'm a doctor often leads to many questions, and it can be tedious. Hi, I'm Sarah. I work as an internal medicine doctor. I was taken aback to hear that amongst us was a fellow doctor. The seemingly reserved woman ordered a non-alcoholic drink and had her cell phone face up on the table. I also kept my phone out in a similar manner, always on alert for emergency calls, so I could tell that Sarah wasn't lying when she said she's a doctor. My buddies would tell me, "Come on, have a drink for once," but I just smiled and brushed it off. The moment Sarah mentioned she was a doctor, she became the center of attention, getting bombarded with questions. "I'm just a nervous in name only," she answered, looking modest or perhaps a bit apologetic. Yet, Sarah's friends seemed proud to have a doctor in their group, boasting about her as if parents would about their child's profession. I'm a doctor too, but I don't yet feel confident in my abilities, so I often avoid mentioning it in front of strangers. Sarah must have an honest and straightforward personality. I felt a tad sympathetic watching her be praised by her friends for being a female doctor and seeing her respond with a troubled smile. My buddies seemed to be growing fond of Sarah, their gaze fixated on her. Anyone could tell Sarah was beautiful, kind, and gave off a delicate vibe. And her humble demeanor probably made her even more likable. I wasn't drawn to her romantically, but I felt a kinship with her as a fellow doctor. Many female doctors at my workplace were strong-willed, had a high society vibe, and were quite snobbish. My alma mater was a state university in a place like Idaho, but my current hospital is affiliated with a private medical college, so there are many young female doctors. Hearing their conversations, there are a lot of things I don't quite understand. Their values clearly clash with mine, and coming from an average family, I often feel out of place. I've always had difficulty connecting with such women. I sensed none of that vibe from Sarah in front of me. As the night went on and we all loosened up with some drinks, the ambience in the bar suddenly shifted. "Sir, are you okay?" The distress call of the store clerk, followed by the sight of a fallen man just beyond the open door. I immediately stood up and approached the man. I informed the clerk that I'm a doctor and diagnosed him with acute alcohol poisoning, instructing her to call an ambulance. From behind, Sarah, pushed forward by our mixer friends, came toward us, visibly shaken. Clearly not accustomed to such situations, her hands trembled. Taking too long to decide and seemingly on the verge of panicking, I reassured Sarah, "It's okay. I'm actually an emergency doctor. I've been through this many times. Stay calm. Let's first get him into a more comfortable position." I whispered that softly to her. Though surprised, Sarah nodded and followed my directions, turning the man to a safer position. Making sure his clothing wasn't restricting him, I asked the clerk for a blanket to keep him warm. Fortunately, he was still breathing. Basic first aid seemed to suffice as we awaited the ambulance. No matter how many times you face emergencies outside the hospital, you never really get used to it. Thankfully, it wasn't more serious. Looking down with regret, Sarah replied, "I couldn't do anything," tears streaming silently. Earlier at the mixer, she had shared that she's working at a big city hospital. Judging by her age, it seemed she had limited experience. She had graduated top of her class, and it seemed everyone had high expectations of her because of it. Earlier, Sarah had said, struggling, "I can't let everyone down. Saving lives but feeling the need to constantly meet others' expectations. I think that's wrong. But I also understand that it's not solely Sarah's fault that she feels this way. I don't care about titles and rarely talk about my profession. Perhaps because of that, people even say things like, 'Oh, right, Jack was a doctor too.' They even made such rude remarks." The contrast between me and Sarah. But seeing her cry out of frustration, it moved me too. I remember having a time like that myself, and I knew firsthand just how painful that kind of regret can be. "Sarah, you're really something." After the man was taken away in an ambulance, Sarah hesitantly began to speak to the friends who had rushed over. "I didn't really. Thanks to your precise instructions, he was saved." She was about to say she hadn't done anything, and I interrupted her and looked up to meet the surprised eyes of Sarah. Her friends were hugging her, saying, "You did great." Sarah looked at me as if asking why, but I figured she just didn't want to let her friends down. From Sarah's bag, a medical reference book was peeking out. Despite being a newly published edition, it was tattered and full of sticky notes. She must be putting in an immeasurable amount of effort. It might just be me being pretentious, but hard work is always rewarded. That's why I hope she doesn't get disheartened now. There will be many more setbacks in the future. But I thought that right now, she doesn't need to bear the guilt of letting her friends down. And the mixer ended after the incidents during the first round. I was relieved I didn't have to think of an excuse for not attending the second round. As I was about to head home with other things on my mind, a timid-looking Sarah approached me, saying, "Jack, please wait." When I asked her what was up, she bowed and thanked me. "Would you mind sharing your contact information? I'd like to stay connected, both as friends and fellow doctors." She offered her phone, looking expectant, and I couldn't help but find her endearing. "Here's my number." "Thank you." When I displayed my number, Sarah registered it with a happy look. After exchanging contact information, she waved and went back to join her group of friends. The ladies were planning a sleepover and mentioned they were heading out for some shopping. My buddies and I decided to hit a bar we know and have another drink. Being the usual non-drinker, I was sober and stared at my phone screen. I received a message from Sarah. She simply said, "Thank you." I replied simply, "You're welcome," and hit send. It seemed that Sarah wasn't great at communication either. That was the end of our message exchange for the moment. Afterwards, we exchanged messages a few times a week, sharing trivial things like how beautiful the sky looked today or that a flower she was growing had bloomed. In our exchanges, we never made plans to go out, but rather shared random thoughts, forming an oddly comfortable bond. Still, I found our little chats comforting. We both have a lot to learn. We're both busy anyway, both of us needing to practice and learn from experience. Too much communication can be draining. From time to time, I looked forward to messages from Sarah like, "Let's keep it up," or "Good job today." I realized I had feelings for her 6 months after we first met. Sarah was driven by her past experiences, always studying and attending various trainings to become a doctor who can save lives under any circumstances. I had busy days juggling work and studies too, but I always made sure to get enough sleep and took breaks when I needed to. Sarah, always being so hard on herself, seemed to push through without taking much time to rest. Every now and then, when she'd call and share how she had learned something new, I'd feel genuinely impressed and wanted to support her. It's tough, but it's fun. I feel like I'm finally on my path and I want to become better every day. Hearing her laugh while saying those words, I was sure of my feelings for her. I think I had these feelings for a while, but it took me some time to recognize them. Finally acknowledging my feelings, I decided to ask Sarah out. "Sarah, when's your next day off?" "Next Thursday." Luckily, our days off matched, so I smoothly brought up the idea of a date. She happily accepted, and I began planning our date. We'd exchanged messages and calls but hadn't met since the day of our initial encounter. Our second meeting in total. But I had decided that on this date, I'd confess my feelings. I knew we both had busy schedules, and it was uncertain when we can meet next. To make my confession successful, I needed the perfect date plan. Then, one night while on duty, an emergency case came in. I quickly assessed the situation, giving directions to the nurse, and rushed to the emergency entrance. The ambulance arrived, and the emergency patient was brought out. With the patient was Sarah, her white knit stained with blood. A man in his 30s collided with an oncoming vehicle while riding his motorcycle. He was unconscious and in critical condition, so we administered CPR and applied emergency bleeding control. While pushing the stretcher together, Sarah explained the situation and the actions taken. "I understand. I'll take it from here." I immediately went into the treatment room and hurriedly administered care, cleaning and stitching the wound, ensuring no damage to the brain. After contacting the patient's family, I finished the treatment. Thanks to the excellent first aid provided, though the injuries were visible, they weren't critical. When I left the treatment room, waiting there was Sarah. "The first aid treatment you gave was perfect and really helped the patient. The patient's life is in no danger," I said, bowing my head in gratitude. Seemingly relieved, Sarah slumped down, saying, "I'm so glad," and tears of relief flowed. After work, I went shopping and saw an accident outside the supermarket. I didn't know what to do at first, but before I realized it, my body just moved on its own. She was scared, but she said she had been reminding herself of why she had been training all this time. It took great courage for her to identify herself as a doctor. She said if she hadn't stepped in, perhaps nobody else would have. I'm aware of how hard Sarah has worked up to this point. "You did well, Sarah." I gently patted her head. Comforted, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, it's getting late, but I'm almost done with work. Would you like to grab some food? There's a diner nearby that's open till morning." Suggesting a meal after work, I invited Sarah. "I'd love to, actually. I haven't even had dinner yet." Sarah replied immediately, mentioning she had been hungry for a while. She looked embarrassed, holding her stomach, and said she would change out of her blood-stained sweater. She grabbed a bag with spare clothes she happened to have and dashed to the restroom. Watching her run, she seemed more dependable than before. It's hard to imagine, especially when thinking about that day when she was so nervous trying to meet her friends' expectations. Perhaps she's slowly gaining confidence in her medical profession. I threw her a good job, as she disappeared from sight. After wrapping up work, I met Sarah sitting at the lobby, and we headed to a nearby diner. We walked in and took our seats to pick from the menu. I ordered grilled chicken, while Sarah opted for steak and potatoes. Sarah's eyes sparkled as she happily ate the food that arrived shortly afterwards. "This place is amazing." Seeing her so pleased, I was glad I brought her here. Before I realized, I was confessing my feelings to her. "Sarah, I like you." Well, she stopped eating, taken aback by the sudden confession. Originally, I had planned to confess during our planned date, a perfect setting I had in mind. I was equally startled, wondering why I had blurted it out now. But what's said is said. Now I had to convey my true feelings. "I admire your hard work, how you always give your best toward your goals. Even the casual texts or the trivial phone calls, I cherish them all." When I told her that Sarah's hard work had saved me many times, she looked down with a blushed face. "This is only our second time meeting, but would you like to date me?" I stood up and reached out my hand. Hesitantly, Sarah took it. "I managed to keep going because of you, Jack. That day, I felt so helpless, yet you helped ensure I didn't let my friend down. I was relieved, but also felt pathetic. But I managed to pull through because of you, even though I can't express it well," she said, taking a deep breath, squeezing my hand tighter. I could feel the intensity of her emotions through her firm grip. To be honest, no words were needed. I could sense the depth of her feelings. "So, I like you too, Jack. If you're okay with someone like me, I'd be grateful." A humble attitude that has not changed since we met. It's so like Sarah, and my affection for her only grows. And just like that, during our second meal together, our relationship began. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other, going on numerous dates. Sarah always said she needed more experience and knowledge, pushing herself harder every day. Inspired by her, I've been attending more training sessions and studying every day. I was worried I might make her feel lonely like in my past relationships, but surprisingly, Sarah isn't the type to feel left out easily. We've had a smooth relationship for 2 years now. Even with our busy lives, Sarah is always by my side. The confession plan I had in mind that day didn't work out, but unexpectedly, we ended up being mutually in love. Now, Sarah and I are married and living together. Sarah is expecting a child, adding more joy to our future. Both of us, with our undying passion for our careers, continue to push and inspire each other every day. After her maternity leave, Sarah's considering switching from internal medicine to emergency medicine. I used to immerse myself in work, thinking I wasn't cut out for love, but now, meeting someone with whom I can share happiness and grow together feels like the greatest blessing in life. I'm determined to work hard to protect this happiness in the future. When I heard her voice, weakly apologizing, I was stunned. I've always known her to be strong-willed and assertive. It was the first time I had ever heard her voice sound so fragile. Such a weak voice didn't suit her at all. That's why I decided to confront whoever was tormenting her. This incident would greatly change the dynamics between her and me. My name is James, a 28-year-old working as a nurse. Nowadays, my paycheck is steady, and I never have to worry about putting food on the table, but it wasn't always this way. My family was slightly well off, and I attended a prestigious middle and high school. Back then, I was a typical nerdy kid with glasses. I didn't have many friends, but I never felt lonely. But I did have a friend, or perhaps a rival. Her name was Catherine. I assumed she didn't like me because she was always tough with me, but it turned out that wasn't the case. Catherine was simply very competitive. You see, we always competed for the top spots in our grades. Since middle school, we had been in the same class. I thought she was just a classmate, but one day she declared, "You're my rival," so I guess that's what we were. Whenever Catherine lost to me in tests or rankings, she would get incredibly frustrated. She had tutors and even attended after-school programs, so she hated losing to someone like me, who did nothing special. All I did was study because, well, I had no friends and nothing else to do. At first, I found her confrontations annoying, but eventually, that feeling faded. Perhaps it was because I got to see her hard-working side. Catherine's father ran a successful business, and she admired him greatly. "I'll take over the company in the future." That is what she professed to those around her. And it wasn't just talk. She was genuinely dedicated to her studies and even played sports to build her physical stamina. She was also actively involved in student council and volunteering. Back then, I didn't have any particular dreams or goals. But watching her work tirelessly towards her dreams was truly inspiring. She had a strong personality, but it was a sign of confidence and was cool. Catherine had charisma, always surrounded by people. She might have been bossy or demanding towards me, her rival, but she was generally great with people and had an uncanny ability to read the room. The opposite of me, who has no friends. She had everything I lacked. That's probably why I was drawn to her, and thinking back, I probably had feelings for her. But then, a life-changing event happened. The company my dad worked for went bankrupt, and he lost his job. Devastated, my mom's health declined and she was hospitalized. Staying in an expensive private school was out of the question, so I had to drop out of high school. News about my father's company going under and my dropping out spread like wildfire throughout the school. Everyone started treating me like I was delicate. But it was Catherine, of all people, who reached out to me during those times. "Why are you quitting? What about college? You could take out student loans and continue your education." Of course, I had thought about that, but considering our current financial situation and my parents' emotional state, I felt it was hard to continue attending a private high school. I explained this to Catherine, but she glared at me with tears in her eyes. "You were my rival. Why, fine. I hate you anyway." The expression on Catherine's face when she yelled was more of sadness than anger. Being the smart girl Catherine was, I believe she understood my family's circumstances. Yet, she probably couldn't sort out her feelings. I couldn't shed a tear when my parents informed me about the company's bankruptcy, nor when I realized I couldn't continue in high school. I felt I had no choice but to accept it. That's why seeing her, who could express her emotions so freely, felt so refreshing. I eventually dropped out of high school and lost contact with Catherine. I worked part-time jobs to save up money. With my parents' encouragement, 2 years later, I took the entrance exam for another high school and started my high school life over. During my mother's hospital stay, I was inspired by a nurse who took care of her, so after high school, I went on to nursing school. My second time in high school and my time in nursing school were financially tough for our family of 3, but we managed to pull through together. After I started working as a nurse, our financial situation gradually improved, and now both my parents and I live a stable life. Then, in my 4th year of working as a nurse, I ran into Catherine at the hospital. She came in as a patient. At first, I thought, could it be someone with the same name? But when I saw her lying in the hospital bed, it was undoubtedly Catherine, my former classmate. She always had a cute face since our student days, but she had grown even more beautiful as an adult. I thought she probably wouldn't be single for long with all the male attention she might be getting, but I kept that thought to myself. Upon seeing me, Catherine looked surprised, but quickly resumed her assertive expression. "It's been a while since you dropped out of high school, right? Giving up and settling for a life without a diploma. What a loser." Her provocative tone was oddly familiar, making me chuckle. It has been a while. It took me 2 years, but I did return to high school. Thanks to that, I even became a nurse. Upon hearing this, Catherine looked at my badge and smiled just a tad. However, she quickly reverted to her assertive demeanor. "Well, that's great for you. I mean, it doesn't concern me, but good for you, I guess." It seemed she had been genuinely worried about me after I dropped out of high school. I wish she could just admit her feelings. Seems like some things never change. She's still so tough with me, even now. After Catherine graduated from a prestigious university, she joined her father's company and has been working hard ever since. I was genuinely happy to learn she was still pursuing the dreams she talked about in high school. It's impressive. You always said you'd take over your dad's company. You're really making it happen. Truly amazing. When I said this, Catherine turned her head down. It's not that big a deal. I still have a long way to go. My dad, he doesn't really recognize my efforts. Her voice trembled, and I couldn't find any words to comfort her. Not wanting to dwell on the topic, I desperately tried to change the subject. Then, I remembered why I had visited her room in the first place. Would you mind if I took care of you while you're here? She quickly looked up. Take care. As your primary nurse, I want to help until you're discharged. Catherine bluntly responded, fine. But I knew that she was just playing coy. Let's make this a good stay. If you need anything, just let me know. She replied softly, thanks. And so, the beautiful girl from my past became my patient. Catherine was admitted because of a severe stomach ulcer. If she had come to the hospital earlier, it might have been better, but in Catherine's case, even the doctors were shocked at how advanced her symptoms were. Knowing her, she might have prioritized her work and endure the pain. I hope she could at least have a stress-free stay in the hospital, but for some reason, she was incredibly demanding but only towards me. Hey, can you get me that shampoo from the gift shop? Could you grab me some magazines? I'd like them today, and so on. It felt like I was doing more personal errands than actual nursing tasks. Come to think of it, she would make such small demands back in high school too. I never imagined she'd still be this way as an adult. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, I discussed this with another nurse, expecting some understanding, but I got a surprising reply. Demanding. Catherine, I've never noticed that. Moreover, not just one but all the other nurses seemed to feel the same way. A lot of Catherine's colleagues came to visit her at the hospital. I subtly asked them about Catherine's character at work, and everyone had nothing but praise for her. They said she's efficient at her job and communicates well with everyone, making the work environment smooth. This means Catherine's demanding behavior is directed only at me. Towards other nurses and people around, Catherine was courteous and had a good reputation. That's why I finally confronted Catherine about her behavior. Why aren't you this demanding with other nurses? What's wrong with me? It's not that. I don't dislike you or anything. For once, even Catherine looked demure. I left her room that day with the air heavy between us. But in the end, she never told me why she was only demanding with me. I think it is too much just because we were just classmates. But the next day, I started to regret a bit. Being hospitalized for so long and taking time off work must be tiring for Catherine. She might just want to be a bit demanding sometimes. I realized that I might have treated her more as a former classmate than a patient. As a nurse, I should first consider the patient's feelings. Thinking I should talk to Catherine again, I went to visit her in her room. But I couldn't enter right away because I heard voices from inside. From the hospital room came the stunned voice of an elderly man. Being hospitalized for a stomach ulcer is an exaggeration. Don't tell me it's because of work stress. Pathetic. Taking time off. I'm really disappointed in you. Dad, Catherine's voice was so weak, I could hardly believe it was her. I guess leaving the company to a woman like you is impossible. You should have just stayed at home, learned to be a proper wife, and agreed to the arranged marriage I set up for you. That's probably all you're good for. From the conversation, the man seemed to be Catherine's father, but what he was saying was incredibly harsh. Ever since middle school and high school, Catherine had admired her father and worked hard to take over the company. From what I've heard from her colleagues, she has been continuously putting in the effort and is competent at her job. I wondered how her stomach ulcer got this bad, and maybe it has something to do with her father. Perhaps she overworked herself, trying to gain her father's approval. Come on, Catherine, stand up for yourself. I silently urged her in my heart, but my wishes weren't conveyed. All I heard was a soft, "I'm truly sorry," from Catherine. Her voice tightened my chest. Maybe it's my fault for giving you time and waiting. You've been a disappointment. Forget about work and the company. I'll arrange another match for you. To his words, Catherine's voice overlapped with tears. Please wait, I can still do it. I believe I can be of use. But her desperate plea went unheard. I clearly heard a heavy sigh from Catherine's father from outside the room. Sigh, marrying into a beneficial business would be much more useful for the company. After saying just that, he left without lending an ear to Catherine's pleas. Nurses probably shouldn't get involved in the personal matters of patients and their families. But at that moment, as a friend, I couldn't just stand by and watch him walk away. Wait, please. Ever since she was a student, she's looked up to you and dreamt of taking over the company. She's continuously worked hard for it. Can't you at least recognize her efforts? Catherine's father looked at me perplexed. You're just a nurse, right? It's not your place to comment. I understand that, but as a friend, I tried to persist, but he interrupted. I'm in a hurry, and left. Without a hint of being moved by my words, he left with a cold expression. Back in the room, Catherine was crying. She covered her face with both hands, trying to hide her tears. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. I apologized like that. In her usual assertive tone, Catherine responded, You really shouldn't have, I'm fine. Then, I held out my right hand to her. Then, show me your hand right now. Huh? Hearing my words, Catherine became hesitant, covering the back of her hand with her other hand. I gently took Catherine's hand in mine. The back of her hand was red. Some spots even looked like they had turned into bruises. Truth be told, since her admission, both the doctors and the nurses had noticed marks on the back of Catherine's hands, as if they'd been pinched. But when another nurse first inquired about it, Catherine seemed to try to hide them. So, the hospital staff was waiting for the right moment to ask her again. And just a short while ago, I accidentally saw it through the small glass on the door. While being berated by her father, Catherine had been digging her nails into the back of her own hand. I asked as gently as I could. You do this from time to time. Catherine remained silent for a bit, but eventually she shared the truth. Apparently, she does it when she feels an excessive amount of stress. It's pathetic. I can't even work well enough to gain my father's approval, and yet I'm so mentally fragile. I remember her being so confident back in our school days. But now, she seemed to have lost that confidence. Given the harsh words she'd received from her father while being sick in the hospital, it might not be surprising that she felt this way. Don't tell anyone I cried, okay? I know you've seen me at my worst since our school days, but I don't want to show my weaknesses to others, she said. It was then that I realized. Her whims that were exclusively for me were because she trusted me, knowing her stubborn side, and maybe a bit of dependence. Realizing that, I couldn't help but want to support her, seeing how hardworking and clumsy she can be. I won't say a thing, but hey, you can tell me anything. I might not be able to offer advice or solutions, but I'll always listen. Catherine gave a small smile and said, Thank you. During the rest of her stay in the hospital, Catherine's selfishness was hushed up, and we spent most of our time talking leisurely. Perhaps Catherine needed a place where she could vent and show her vulnerabilities. She had decided to take an extended break from work. After her discharge, Catherine and I began to occasionally meet up and go out for meals. She had returned to work, but instead of diving back in full throttle, she seemed to be taking things more slowly. Spending time with me, I think she pondered on how to work while also taking care of herself. I was curious about her relationship with her father, but I decided not to ask until she brought it up. Still, her expression seemed brighter compared to when she was in the hospital. So, I chose to watch over her a little longer. During our fourth dinner together, I confessed my feelings to Catherine. Sadly, she turned me down. However, she did ask if I could wait a little longer. Of course, I asked her why, but she didn't tell me. But since she asked me to wait, I felt I had no other choice. 3 months later, out of the blue, she told me, I quit my job. After her discharge, her father had apparently tried to push forward with a marriage arrangement. But Catherine simply couldn't accept that and decided to distance herself from her father. You sure about that? Weren't you saying since school that you wanted to take over your dad's company? I asked. To that, she laughed and said, I'm over it. Being with you, you've affirmed every part of me. I felt like I was able to breathe properly for the first time in ages. Food tastes better, and I sleep soundly. I realized I hadn't been taking care of myself at all. From now on, I want to live in an environment where I'm accepted for who I am. Her smile as she said this was genuine and unclouded. So, will you stand by me as I make a fresh start? She asked. I responded with an enthusiastic of course, and hugged her. I was overjoyed to see her moving forward while cherishing herself. And so, our romantic relationship began. 2 years have passed since then, and Catherine is now working hard at a company different from her father's. I proposed to her recently, got the green light, and we plan to marry soon. After Catherine left her father's company, Catherine's father was apparently severely scolded by her mother. She told him, "Your way of thinking is too old-fashioned. Change your ways or we're getting a divorce." It seems that was the wake-up call for Catherine's father. But as we know, people don't change overnight. Nevertheless, it seems he's gradually coming to accept Catherine. We managed to chat a bit when we visited him to formally announce our engagement. Apparently, his excessive expectations stemmed from the fact that she's his daughter. Both Catherine and her father seem to have a mutual desire to reconcile. Their relationship may still be somewhat strained, but I hope I can help bridge the gap between them. I'm certain their relationship can be mended. After all, Catherine's father has a wife who isn't afraid to scold him, and Catherine has me by her side. I believe that when people have someone to lean on, they can become kinder and continue to move forward with hope. This is the story of how my wife and I met. Thank you for listening to my story about the woman I adore most in the world. I hope to continue building a happy home with her while I am under my wife's thumb. Hey, old man, do you know what I called you in today? After lunch break, I was immediately summoned by my director, Anderson. I headed straight to the CEO's office, which had recently changed hands. I'm sorry, did I make a mistake? In this company, there's no job suitable for old-timers like you, so you don't have to come in from tomorrow. It took me a moment to comprehend, but I had just been fired. I have been with this company since my 20s, making it 35 years. Suddenly, I was out of work. Anderson often pointed out my lack of urgency and slowness in my work. I always tried to work meticulously, keeping the company's relationships in mind. Was that my downfall? Feeling the weight of the unfairness, I realized I needed to find a new job ASAP. At that time, I hadn't even considered the possibility of retaliating against Anderson or the CEO. My name is David. I'm a designer and 50-something years old. Just 3 years ago, I lost my wife and have been living alone ever since. To drown my loneliness, I dove deeper into my work than ever before. In this digital age, it might be uncommon, but I design using paints and paper. My work was highly appreciated by the previous CEO and our clients. However, it seemed Anderson wasn't a fan. He would often badmouth me when the CEO wasn't around. When the previous CEO passed away unexpectedly, a new, younger CEO took over. He was keen on introducing new technologies and phased out the old ones. Anderson, being close to the CEO, seemed to be completely on board with these modern ideas. I felt he was desperate to catch up with the modern way of thinking. From now on, we will switch all operations to computer-based systems. Since the day that was announced, using paint for designs was prohibited, and instead, we were to use computer software. I've been in this industry for nearly 30 years, but I've hardly ever designed using software. My knowledge was equivalent to that of a student fresh out of school. I regretted not having studied this earlier. Admitting my mistake, I started studying design software every day from then on. There were people in their 20s, fresh out of college, at the company, and I managed to learn a lot from them, eventually acquiring enough skill to do my job. The move to this policy was due to the young, 30-something second-generation CEO wanting to take on what's currently trending. I was the only one in this department who was a beginner at using design software, so the looks from Anderson stung a bit. At first, I was making design corrections for my subordinates as a form of study, but gradually I started to receive my own work. Having been in the industry for so long, I felt confident that once I had the knowledge, I could create designs that would not be inferior to the younger generation. However, it seemed like Anderson didn't think too highly of my work. "You're a bit too slow. People younger than you are faster, so get it together." "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still not quite up to speed." "Make sure you do. We can't give you much work because the quality isn't there yet." "I'm sorry." Conversations like this happened at least once a day. A subordinate who had seen this told me not to worry and to ask them anything, which was a relief. But being rushed every day made me panic and rapidly lose confidence. Maybe this job isn't for someone my age, as retirement is nearing. I thought about taking early retirement. I was living with those thoughts. One day, we received a request from a long-standing client company. They wanted a design made with paint. However, our company mandated the use of computer software. I wanted to take on the request to meet the client's needs. I decided to discuss it once with Anderson. "Anderson, I have a consultation. A client has requested a design using paint, and I'm asking for permission just this once to create without using software." "Huh, what are you talking about? Didn't we mandate the use of software for everything recently? But there is a certain demand for this. We have maintained a long relationship with this client, and to continue working with them, that's impossible. This is why old people are not useful. Can't you see that analog is behind the times? Didn't the CEO say so? The area is digital. AI might even come into play soon. If you can't keep up, it's impossible for you to stay in this industry. I have learned the software knowledge from the juniors. Depending on the time and situation, I can use either. Is that still not good enough? You're a stubborn old man. Just give up." I was practically thrown out of the CEO's office. Lately, Anderson had been clinging to the CEO, doing whatever he said. After that, I attempted to negotiate with Anderson several times but to no avail. It's about time I get back to the client with a response. One day, I was summoned to the CEO's office by Anderson. By then, I had almost no work left, so I had a rough idea of what would be discussed. Upon arrival, I bowed deeply. The CEO sat in his chair, looking down on me with that familiar condescending gaze. I recognized that face. People make the same face when they're pushing you away. To be honest, I don't remember much of what Anderson and I discussed after entering the room. However, one sentence resonated strangely in my mind. "You don't have to come from tomorrow. Yes. Thank you for everything until now. Within half a year after the change to the second-generation CEO, I was out of a job. And not just any exit, I was fired. It was a good thing my wife wasn't around anymore to see this. If I showed myself like this, it would be embarrassingly unbearable. I felt so pitiful and, without saying a word to anyone, I left the company. To the juniors who taught me about the software and the clients, I felt sorry, but I lacked the courage to express my gratitude or apologize. Since I was technically fired, I guess unemployment benefits would kick in immediately. However, I wanted to work right away. I feared if I continued to feel this sad, I might even fall. That was on my mind. But I often wondered, as Anderson used to say, is there really a place that would hire an old man like me? I had experience as a designer, but I worried if my inability to use the software would be a stumbling block again. Despite the anxiety, I sent out resumes to various companies. Design, customer service, wholesale, clerical work. I must have sent out nearly 20 resumes. Only 5 companies called me for an interview, and just 1 progressed to the final round. And that one company was a rival of my former employer. I had no expectations of getting the job. You've certainly got the know-how. I had a look at the designs you've been working on, and they are all meticulously made and easy on the eyes. I'd really love for you to work with us. What do you say? Really? Absolutely. I'd love to work with you. Then, how about starting a week from now? And I'd like you to show our newcomer the ropes on how to design the old-fashioned way. Thank you so much. It felt so good to be recognized for my skills again. I was going to be a designer once more. A month had passed since I joined the company, and I was getting the hang of things, albeit slowly. Then something shocking happened. On my first payday at this company, my take-home pay had nearly increased by $2,000. It's a bit crass to say, but this company pays incredibly well, I muttered under my breath, and Sam laughed heartily. That's because you're incredibly skilled, David. I don't know how much you made at your last job, but you're a special talent that would thrive anywhere. I felt a bit bashful but very happy. While learning the ropes and earning praise from both my juniors and Sam, I wondered if I was truly becoming an asset to the team. That's when my phone rang. It was Anderson. I hesitantly answered, only to be greeted with an angry tirade. As a professional and an adult, you're disqualified. Everyone's in trouble because of you. Please, calm down. What happened? There's no time for what happened. You left the job without handing anything over. We have none of the client information or past data. That's because I was told to leave on the day, and there wasn't any time. Such poor excuses. What have you done to us? Send over the handover data within 2 days. You're unemployed and free right now, right? Thanks in advance. The call ended abruptly, with the responsibility unilaterally pushed onto me. What would Anderson think if he knew I was working for a rival company? I had new assignments at my current job and needed to start on them immediately. I was troubled and decided to consult with Sam. Sam, sorry to bother you. I just got a call from my previous workplace, and they urgently requested that I send over handover documents. I'm considering stepping out for about 2 hours to take care of this. That's fine, but you've already left that place, and it wasn't on the best of terms, right? Yes, that's true. It's really up to you, David. It's hard to have confidence sometimes, but you should have confidence at a good level because you are doing a great job. Deep down, I knew I didn't have to do this. But it became certain after his words. Thank you, I'll stay put today. After our conversation, Sam gave me a warm smile and went back to his work. That day, I didn't touch the handover documents. With that, I had completely severed ties with my former company. Sorry for the sudden call. This is John. Do you remember me? About a month had passed since I'd ignored Anderson's calls and cut off contact, when John, a former junior of mine, reached out. Wary that he might have been prompted by Anderson, I nervously answered the call to hear an obviously flustered voice. "Yes, I remember you. I'm sorry for quitting so abruptly and causing trouble. What happened today?" "No worries at all. You left because of the CEO and the director, right? We've been having some troubles. From what I've heard, it seems like employees in their 40s and 50s, other than myself, are being laid off across the board. It's like the company is now being run by the remaining younger employees. Moreover, there have been a lot of problems because there wasn't a proper handover. We actually just lost a major client, and the CEO is on edge. Plus, there seems to be a lot of inadequate communication between departments, leading to missed deadlines. What should I do?" I suggested that such coordinating tasks should be left to a supervisor, since he's a new recruit and doesn't bear that much responsibility yet, trying to console him a bit. Then he replied with some difficulty. "The thing is, I'm the leader. After all the senior staff resigned, the CEO told me that young people need to step up in this new era and that I should become a leader to incorporate their perspectives." John sounded utterly despondent. He's a rookie who just joined this year. Even I, not the strongest-willed person, can tell something is off. Still, I felt resistance to the idea of protesting directly to the CEO or the director. From what I've heard about his workload, it seems he's been burdened with a lot: departmental coordination, visiting clients, dealing with older employees, meetings with the CEO. This could break him. He taught me how to use some design software. I wanted to help him, partly as a thank you. When I asked him what was the biggest challenge right now, he said, "There's this client you used to handle, and it looks like we're going to lose their contract. The CEO has said that's the one thing he wants to keep at all costs, but honestly, with the current management strategy, it seems unlikely." Indeed, the client I used to manage favored designs using traditional paints and paper. I'm at my limit. I've tried to hold on for 6 months, but I can't keep this up. But I'm the leader, and there are seniors here. He seems to be considering quitting. Something has to be done before his spirit breaks. I had an idea that I decided to share with John. At first, he was surprised, but it seemed like he gradually took in what I was saying. "Thank you for listening. Thanks to you, David, I've made up my mind. I owe a lot to you, John. Come talk to me anytime if you need to. I'll be waiting." With that, I hung up the phone. I hope I can be of some help to John. Today was the day I had taken the morning off. I woke up to a surprise. I had over 10 missed calls from private numbers. It could even be over 30. I called back with some trepidation, and my bad feeling was confirmed. "You're late. What did you tell John? Because of you, everything is ruined." It was rare to hear Anderson so flustered on the phone. What on earth happened? I did, in fact, share some information with John. That's true. John took unscheduled leave today. He's not answering emails or calls, and when we checked his desk, there was a note in the corner saying going to David's place. His actions were so swift, I was taken aback. I had simply offered to introduce him to my current workplace if he wanted. Of course, I told him that I couldn't guarantee he would get an interview. "How are you going to make this right? We have deadlines for various projects coming up. This is all your fault. I'll sue you." The word sue made me flinch, and just as I was about to respond, I heard an employee call out for Anderson. There were also sounds of phones ringing, footsteps. It seems like things might be quite chaotic. As I was casually pondering this, the phone abruptly hung up. I've always had trouble digesting Anderson's words. They have a certain edge to them. But I'm different from how I used to be. Half a year into my new company, I've gained a lot of confidence. If someone asked what the heck the old man was rambling about, I'd be at a loss for words, but it seems like I've managed to grow not just technically, but emotionally as well. I don't think this is my fault, but the word sue still lingers in my mind. I decided to consult with Sam about it. In the afternoon, I went to work as usual. And there, talking happily with Sam, was a young man with a familiar face. "Ah, David, thank you for everything. I really owe you one for all you did for me at the previous company, and thank you so much for the other day. It's great to see you're doing well. I heard from Anderson. Did you quit abruptly? Has that gotten out? I'm embarrassed. I guess I've failed as a professional." "Not at all, John. It's your life. If you've hit your limit, it's okay to run away. But what were you planning to do if you didn't pass this interview?" "Well, I would have winged it." Such a typically youthful response. I really like that way of thinking. Come to think of it, he's here for an interview, isn't he? I wonder if he passed. Feeling a bit anxious, I glanced at Sam. After a moment of silence, Sam grinned and formed a big circle with his hands above his head. I felt relieved and the tension left my shoulders. Later, John asked me why I knew he had quit, so I told him honestly about what happened that morning. "John quit because of me. They said they would sue. I wonder, will I be sued?" Sam looked dumbfounded for a moment, but soon returned to his usual smile and assured me that based on what I and John had been through, there was no chance for the other side to win, so I should rest easy. "From what you've told me, it sounds like what they're doing is wrongful termination. Maybe we have the stronger case. Be confident. By the way, was the CEO always that kind of person?" Sam reminisced about the times our companies collaborated and when we once went out for drinks. The CEO he spoke of seemed gentle and calm, which brought back nostalgic feelings. That might be the father, the first-generation CEO. It changed to the second generation after he passed away. Really, I thought something was off since they seemed like completely different people. I see now. I have a feeling that company won't last another few months. Actually, 3 of my colleagues who joined as fresh graduates also resigned today, and my current boss said he's resigning too. It's unforgivable for them to let the company that their father worked so hard to maintain go bankrupt. All right, next time they contact you, let me handle it. I'll give them a piece of my mind. Right after he said that, Sam's cell phone rang and he swiftly left the room. Honestly, I had a hunch that the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Just young employees with limited work experience are starting new ventures and building relationships with various companies. That's no easy feat. While pondering this, chatting with John, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I immediately answered the call, and I could hear Anderson's voice, almost like a scream, at a high volume. John seemed very surprised by it too. "Hey, sort this mess out. I've been dealing with one thing after another since morning, and we're short-staffed. I've resigned as well. There's nothing I can do. Aren't you unemployed? You can at least show up and lend a hand. When else are you going to look cool, old man?" We must have repeated such an exchange for about 5 minutes. I was considering hanging up when I heard a rather loud voice from the side. "I've been listening quietly up till now. What kind of way is that to ask for help? That's no way to talk to people. Who's the real adult here?" After a moment of silence, John let out all he had been holding back, yelling into the phone. Then Anderson started speaking in a shaky voice. "John, is that you, John? Please, I'm not angry. Come back. The CEO is waiting. We need you." He muttered to himself, but John clearly said, "No." Anderson then spoke in a disheartened voice. "Are you saying, even if I get fired, the company can't run without me? I'm young, not an old man, so I won't be fired." It seemed he was afraid of being fired. He has a middle school-aged child. He must be worried. But he's 49, just 4 years younger than me. To the second-generation CEO, he must seem like an old man. "Look, if you continue the contract with the client David used to handle, I'll tell the CEO to give you a raise immediately. So, won't you come back?" About that client, they've just signed a contract with our company." It seems Anderson and John's loud voices were overheard by Sam. He relayed the facts, as if discarding them. When I had spoken with John on the phone, I had asked him to let my former client know where I was if he was coming to this company for an interview. "Who the heck are you, outsiders? Get out. I'm talking to John here." "Anderson, buddy. I think we've met before, don't you remember? It was back when the previous CEO was around. We had a drink together. I'm Sam Smith. You seemed so genuine at the drinking party. Was that just for show?" When Anderson remembered Sam, he lost his cool big time. He was probably shocked that an outsider, and from a competing company no less, had seen his true nature, not to mention that I and John were there at the rival firm. What am I supposed to say to the CEO? At this point, I don't care if it's David anymore. I'll hire you again, so come over to our place right now. The next moment, Anderson was getting called out on his choice of words by Sam. Anderson was still confused, and all the chaos around footsteps, phones ringing, sounds of apologies was audible over the phone. "David, I'm sorry. All right. Please come back. You can stay forever this time. Can you pay me 10 times the salary?" "What?" I could hear the life go out of his voice. Anderson probably believed I'd come back because I was timid. But now, I have a place at Sam's company. There's nothing to fear. 10 times? What are you talking about? You know our company doesn't have that kind of money, right? If you can't pay, then it's impossible. Please do your best as you are. I'm getting about twice the salary you guys are at my current company. I have no intention of coming back. Anderson was saying something, but I could barely make it out over the background noise. After a while, I just heard noise until the call eventually dropped. After that, there was a moment that seemed to stand still, but I snapped out of it when John said, "That was pretty cool." Things moved fast after that. The staff kept quitting, and in the end, there were less than a third left. Unable to continue working with such a shortage of hands, it seems the company went bankrupt 3 months after my last contact with Anderson. Anderson apparently didn't get fired due to the shortage of people, but he ended up losing his job anyway. I heard from a former colleague at the old company. Anderson can't find work now and is separating from his wife and daughter until he can find a job. It seems his domineering attitude towards his subordinates also got out to his family. I heard they might even get a divorce. Anderson seems desperate, but without having the CEO as a shirt-on hold, I wonder how he's making decisions now. "David, that last design was great. You're really something. Glad we hired you. It's been a year since I started working here. This company recognizes and praises me. Everyone works to lift each other up. That day, I was in despair, but I'm here now because I was let go that day. In a way, I'm thankful to the CEO of the previous company and Anderson. I'm swamped with work I've been entrusted with, but it's a good kind of busy. Until retirement, no. As long as they'll have me, I plan to work my hardest. I work as a taxi driver. I'm divorced with no kids. I split from my ex-wife, Catherine, 20 years ago. I graduated from college and landed a corporate job. Every day I was busy expanding the customer base as a salesman. One day, during a company party, I hit it off with a woman named Catherine, who was seated next to me. I confessed my feelings. We dated for about a year and then got married. We didn't have kids, but we were a happy couple. 3 years into our marriage, there was an economic downturn everywhere. Every day, news about companies laying off their employees was all over the media. I always felt my company was immune to it, like it was someone else's problem. Then, out of the blue, my boss called me into his office and suggested I take an early retirement. "You're aware our company's performance isn't great, so we've decided to reduce staff. There's a bonus for those who opt for early retirement. You're still young, you should be able to find another job. Think it over. That's all I have to say." With that, my boss left the room. I was in disbelief and couldn't come to terms with it. Why me? I was in shock and couldn't think straight. It was a layoff disguised as early retirement. Our company is small scale, and the severance package was almost negligible. When I told my wife, Catherine, she seemed shocked and worried. Wait, what? It had been our agreement that Catherine would be a stay-at-home wife after we got married. But now, the one who had asked her to stay at home had to ask her to work. It was an unexpected turn of events, and I grew more frustrated by the day. From then on, Catherine and I started arguing about money and jobs. Our once peaceful marriage became rocky. Eventually, Catherine left a divorce note and moved out. It felt like the layoff had ruined my life. Afterwards, I was so devastated that I spent my days in a state of despair in our now empty house. But I couldn't continue living that way forever. Despite my efforts to find a new job, nothing was working out. I kept getting rejected even at the initial application stage. During one job fair, a senior employee from my current company approached me. Somehow, I ended up as a taxi driver, which was fine, but maybe because I started just for a living, I wasn't putting my heart into it at first. I faced many complaints during my early days due to my attitude, but an encounter with a young girl changed my perspective. Thanks to that experience, I can now take pride in doing my job with dedication. Phew, how many rejections have I had so far? While in the cab, I let out a long sigh. It's been 3 months since I started job hunting. I've been rejected by over 30 companies. When rejection keeps piling up, it feels like society is telling you, "We don't need you," and it's really weighing on me. Miss, is everything okay? Did something happen? No, actually, I poured out my frustrations to the taxi driver. Despite studying hard, I failed my university entrance exam and ended up in my second choice. The economic downturn makes job hunting tough. My parents got divorced, and it's hard to reach out to either of them. It seems like I'm always failing at something. I choked back tears as I wrapped up my story. Well, I've been there. I was laid off from my job, and things didn't work out with my wife, leading to our divorce. Finding a new job was a real challenge. Even when I got this taxi job, I wasn't passionate about it at first. I was taken by surprise when the taxi driver suddenly began speaking to me. "You're about the age she would be now. She must be too. Excuse me, do you have a daughter?" "No, but a long time ago, I helped a little girl. It was a pitch-dark night." The driver began to reminisce. He was waiting for passengers near the rotary in front of a train station when a small girl approached him. "Please, can you take me to the vet?" Perhaps because of the rain that had just stopped, she was soaking wet. She held a limp kitten in her arms. The girl handed the driver a $5 bill she had been clutching and pleaded. "Please hurry. This is all the money I have. Go quickly." The driver realized something was wrong and immediately drove her to the nearby animal hospital, where the kitten received treatment. "I hope the kitty's okay." Later, the girl's parents arrived and he learned the full story. Apparently, she had found the kitten and wanted to keep it, but her parents didn't allow it, so she had secretly been taking care of it in a park. She had gone to check on the kitten during the heavy rain earlier and found it collapsed. "Oh no, kitty, are you okay?" According to the vet, the kitten was just malnourished and would be fine with proper feeding. "The kitty will be okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Taxi Driver. I couldn't have gone to the vet on my own." The girl's eyes sparkled as she spoke. "By the way, I'm sorry. My dad told me $5 isn't enough for a cab ride. I shouldn't have troubled you. It's okay. The important thing is the kitten's safe. You're going to keep it at home, right?" "I can't. I live in an apartment. They don't allow cats. I need to find it a home." "Oh, so the kitty doesn't have a place to stay either." It was then that the driver had an idea. Why not become the kitten's owner himself? He thought he could manage to care for a homeless cat, even if he couldn't support his wife. That incident changed the way I view my job. That girl made me realize that my job is to help people. My attitude towards work changed because of her. I owe her a lot. The taxi driver spoke with deep emotion. Wait a minute. This story. I had been listening intently to the driver's story, my heart racing. Your cat is a tabby with droopy eyes, right? How did you know? Of course he'd be surprised. That makes sense. He hadn't described the cat to me. There was no way a stranger like me would know the specifics about his cat. Well, when I found the kitten, it was about 3 months old. I took care of it in the park for about a week. You're that little girl from back then. Yes, that's right. I nodded in response to the driver's words. It turned out that the drenched girl in the taxi driver's story was me. Well, that's quite the surprise. I was surprised too. Who would have thought? I discreetly peeked at the driver's face from over his shoulder. I'm glad to hear your cat is so well. He's been healthy and cuddles with me every day. I named him Whiskers, even though he's a tabby. He has some calico patterns on him, but it's amazing to think such a little girl has grown into such a remarkable young lady. Oh, I'm not that remarkable. Then he handed me his business card. Here's my phone number and my email and Facebook ID. I don't think you'd have anything to chat with an old guy like me about, but if you're ever feeling down, give me a shout. I won't push for a meetup or anything, okay? His words almost brought tears to my eyes. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to me with such warmth. Touched, I began to tear up. Thank you. What happened? Why the tears? Did I say something wrong? No, I'm just grateful for your words. I see. You've had it tough, huh? The driver gently patted my back. I sniffled, crying even louder. It's okay. Reach out if things get tough again. Jess. Thank you. Holding onto his business card, I parted ways with the driver. Although I felt a bit lonely, my heart was somehow warm. Not long after, the driver sent me a picture of Whiskers. When I first found him, he was tiny enough to fit in my palm, but now, he's a big cat, weighing over 22 pounds. Even on bad days, looking at plump Whiskers photos always cheered me up. However, my job search continued to be challenging. But, for some reason, I didn't get as down as before. There are times when your hard work isn't recognized. But if you give up just because of that, it's over. I continued my job hunt with determination and also worked on my thesis. Whenever I felt disheartened, I'd message the driver on Facebook. And he'd always reply with a picture of Whiskers, cheering me on with a "keep it up." But then, something happened that threw me off. "Hello, Michelle. How about moving in with me?" Why such a sudden proposal? It was a call from my mom. My dad was paying for my college tuition, and I was covering my living expenses with a part-time job and scholarships. So I thought I'd be financially stable until graduation. You remember who raised you, right? I do, but I'm lost. Can you explain what's going on? As I said that, she went on to say she's struggling financially and wants me to drop out and start working immediately. Hold on, what about Dad, who's been covering my tuition? If I drop out now, it'd be a waste of all that money, wouldn't it? But I'm out of money. I need you to help me out. I'm sorry, I have to hang up now. Wait. Unable to bear my mom's words, I quickly hung up. She called back immediately, but I ignored it. From that day, I received numerous messages and missed calls from her. But I didn't even have the strength to go through them. At that moment, a message arrived in my inbox. Oh, looking at the attached photo, I was taken aback. It was a picture of Whiskers. Been a while since we talked. Everything okay? Seeing the driver's message, tears welled up in my eyes. I immediately called him to talk about my mom. I'm sorry. I know it's your lunch break. No, I'm sorry for sending you a message during such a hard time. But you should probably keep your distance from your mom for a while. It's not right for a parent to tell their college-aged daughter to support herself. Hearing the driver's words, I quietly nodded. I decided to cut off contact with my mom until my life settled down. I explained the situation to my dad and asked him to be clear with her if she inquired about me. If anything happens, just let me know. I think I can help talk to your mom. Thank you. From that day, I stopped communicating with my mom. After distancing myself from her, I could finally focus on my own life. My younger brother told me she kept calling him persistently, but he firmly declined her calls. After that, she stopped reaching out. I then met up with the driver and finally got to see the real Whiskers. Whiskers, upon hearing my call, it meowed and came closer to me. He's so adorable. Thinking of those times always brings a smile to my face. During those challenging job hunting days, a dream sprouted within me. I shared it with the driver. I've found what I want to do. Oh, that's great. What is it? I began juggling a part-time job and attending a driving school to achieve a certain qualification. Finally, after a few years, I realized my dream. Welcome, you might be the first female taxi driver in our company. I successfully passed the driving test and geography exam and got a job at the same taxi company where the driver worked. I'm looking forward to working with you. I got you. I shook Ken's hand. He gently patted my head. I have another dream. Once I get used to the job, I plan to confess my feelings to the driver. I hope, someday, the three of us, including Whiskers, can live together. With that thought, I smiled to myself.